If you feel a lot of tightness on the front side of your hip or an annoying pinch whenever you bend over or pull your knee to your chest, this video is going to show you how you can instantly fix that. You see, most of the time these pinches are occurring because there's not enough space for the femur bone right here to glide within the hip socket. When we move into this hip bend or hip flexion position, the femur right here moves and glides back within the hip socket. So there has to be space for this action to occur. And if there's not, then we're going to run into a sensation where the femur can't move into that position anymore, so it pinches or it could potentially impinge, and that can create that sensation of a block. Now this can happen one of two ways, if my foot is fixated to the ground or not. Let's start with the first example. Let's say I'm just moving into hip bend from a standing position. I'm bending over to pick something up. You could see that what happens within the femur is it's gliding back within the hip socket as I'm moving into more and more of that hip flexion. Now if I was laying on the ground and I was just simply pulling one knee to my chest like this, you can see what would be happening within that hip socket right there. You could see how that would be gliding back within the hip socket the further back that I go. Now the thing that most commonly restricts this in the first place is a pelvis that's already starting in an anterior pelvic tilt, which is a position of hip flexion. This is going to chew up how much space you actually have to move into more hip flexion. Now there's two common fixes for this that work in most of the cases. The first is to take the pelvis and get it into more of a posteriorly rotated position, improve its neutrality, so to speak, so that way it can start from a position where there's more space for the femur to glide in the hip socket in the first place. That is usually going to be a good starting idea for most people. And the way we do that is to get muscles on the backside of the pelvis, like the hamstrings, to better control the tilt of the pelvis and bring it back into relatively more of a posterior rotation of the pelvis. The other thing that we can do is create more space for the femur to glide back within the hip socket by improving that starting position of the femur via having it start in relatively more of a forward position. If we can get the femur starting here in the presence of more of a neutral pelvis, then there's more space for it to go back as we move into hip flexion. I'm going to show you an exercise for both of those things, starting for the first one, which is improving the ability for the pelvis to rotate back into more of a posterior rotation. For this first one, you're gonna need a foam roller and something like a ball or maybe even a pillow folded in half. And this is just gonna be a placeholder. You're gonna slide in between the deepest part of your groin right here, just to keep everything aligned. And then you're gonna take this foam roller and you're gonna place it underneath your heels as far away from you as is comfortable to start. So probably right about here. And then you're gonna let your head just relax. You want your chin pointed at the ceiling to start, and this is the position you wanna be in. Now for the first step, you're just gonna slightly pull your toes back and you're gonna press your heels into that foam roller. Your low back is gonna stay flat, but your tailbone is gonna slightly lift off of the ground. This is a posterior tilt of the pelvis. You're just gonna hold this position as you breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth with your chin pointed at the ceiling. At the end of that exhale, you're gonna feel a little side ab tension engaged. So it should be a nice long 5 to 10 second exhale. Hold that slight tension in your side abs as you inhale through your nose, and you'll feel your rib cage expand. That exhale is important because it'll bring your rib cage down and further assist in a slight tilt back, posterior tilt to the pelvis. As you get better at this, you can slowly bring that foam roller in a little bit more, and now you're gonna be in more hip bend or flexion, but you should never ever feel a pinch in the front of your hip. You should only feel your hamstrings, back of the thigh muscles working. This is primarily where you should feel this. And then you can just, again, go through another set of 5 breath cycles, making sure your low back is mostly flat and your tailbone is very slightly lifted off the ground. What you don't want to do is arch your rib cage like this. This is bad. This is not going to be training what we want. Make sure that low back is nice and flat. And then again, I can bring it in a little bit further. And now I can go through the same thing. Eventually I'm not gonna be able to bring it much closer, but this will really help train my pelvis to get in that posterior tilt. If you feel like you're gonna cramp in your hamstrings, you're probably too close. You need to back it off a little bit more. If this is making sense to you and you like doing these exercises that truly address the root cause of a lot of these common movement limitations, like this hip pinching and impingement, check out my beginner body restoration program because it's designed for anyone to be able to do and addresses tons of common movement limitations, postural issues, and all sorts of different types of pain that could potentially be associated with that. Check that out down below in the description for more. Now here's an exercise that will improve the ability of the femur to slide forward within the hip socket, which will then give it more space to then move back within the hip socket as you go into more of that hip flexion. Okay, for this next one, you're gonna be in this cross 90-90 position. So 90-degree bend at the knee in the front, 90-degree bend at the knee in the back. And this back knee is more or less straight out from the line of your shoulder. If you need to bring it slightly more forward, that's okay, but you generally wanna have it right about here. Now what you want to do is you want to take your hands, place one down by your side here, and then the opposite side of the legs forward, it's going to be slightly in front, like right here. Now, you want to make sure that you have some slight degree of an incline in your torso, just a little bit, so that way you're nice and comfortable and everything is nice and aligned. And you're going to feel pressure through the outside of your knee down through the outside of your ankle. And all you're gonna do is keeping your eyes straight ahead in line with your spine. You're gonna press evenly through the pressure through here, outside of the knee, down through the outside of the ankle, and you're gonna lift off a little bit. And you're gonna feel your glute contract in the back of that front leg. This leg right here is just kind of hanging out. Not much is happening here. It's just kind of staying flat on the ground. As you feel that glute contract, hold this for about 3 to 5 seconds, and then go back down. You don't need to get off of the ground much at all. Now to make this more comfortable for you, you can play around with the hand position. So some people will be more comfortable back here. You can get a little bit more forward if you want. That's going to incline your torso angle a little bit more, but again, regardless, make sure that you feel just your glute in the back of the front leg working. You don't want anything in the front of the hip. If you do, you're probably too bent over like this. So play around with a little bit, find what works for you, and then go through those reps, holding at the top for a little bit, and then going back down. And again, that back leg should not really be doing much at all. I'd recommend doing these exercises in the order that you see them in the video, and I would recommend the first exercise doing that for about 2 to 3 sets of 5 to 10 breath cycles, and the second one for 2 to 3 sets of about 5 to 10 very slow and controlled lifts, and then retest and see how your hips feel. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe.